So the last thing I think I told you yesterday is they reached the mouth of the Yellowstone River by the end of April. Is that correct? 1805. And just to reiterate, so Jaden gets a good start, when they got to the mouth of the Yellowstone, they could have gone southward or kind of northward. They knew they needed to stay on the Missouri River. And the reason they knew that they needed to stay northward and not go southward on the Yellowstone is because the Mandan Indians had given them that direction. Okay? So with that said, in mid-May of 1805, the Corps of Discovery continues up the Missouri River, and they pass the mouth of the Milk River. Now, if you look on your map, it's a little difficult to see. It's right here because I've got the mid-May there, and it's a river that's running northward into Canada. Okay? So they came across the Milk River in mid-May 1805. Now, it was already named by the Native Americans. They called it, quote, the river that scolds all others. So it was a river that was already named. It was named by the Native Americans, the river that scolds all others. But Lewis and Clark renamed it. Okay? And why did they call it the Milk River?
Milky.
It wasn't white, but you're close. It was milky looking. What time of the year is this? Spring, and so you got the runoff, so obviously it wasn't clear. It was had a milky look to it, maybe not white, but a chocolate, maybe milky look to it. If you go fishing this time of the year in May, the fishing's usually not that great because the rivers haven't cleared and they're muddy, and you can't, especially if you fish with flies or lures or those types of things. So because of its appearance, because of its muddy appearance, Lewis and Clark called it the Milk River. Well, they continued down the Missouri, and on June 5th of 1805, they reached the mouth of the Marias River, which Lewis named after his cousin, Mariah Wood. Okay? So, on June 2nd of 1805, Lewis and Clark reached the mouth of the Marias River. It was named after Lewis's cousin, Mariah Wood. And they would camp in the vicinity of the Marias River for 10 days. They would stay there for 10 days. From June 2nd through June 12th. They were going to stay camped in the vicinity of the mouth of the Marias River. Now the reason why they stayed there for 10 days, at this point, they weren't sure which way to go. They didn't know to go up the Marias River to reach the Columbia, which would take them to the Pacific, or to stay south on the Missouri River. Okay? And so, to try to figure this out, Lewis and Clark split up. Okay? And they basically stood at a spot before they split up called Decision Point. It's near Loma, Montana. It's pretty cool. You stand up on a little bluff and you can see the Missouri River continuing this way and the Marias going this way. Pretty cool place. And they stood there at Decision Point trying to decide, okay, which way do we need to go? So they split up. Now, they had heard through Indian accounts that there was a great waterfall on the route that would take them to the Columbia. And so as they split up, that's what they were looking for. Okay? Lewis followed the Marias River to the north, and Clark followed the Missouri River to the south. Both men looking for this waterfall that was described by Native Americans that were on the route to the Pacific. So did they know the Missouri River took them to the Columbia River to the Pacific? No. They didn't know. Maybe the Marias River did. But the only way they were going to find out is find those waterfalls. So deciding to try and trying to decide the correct route to the Pacific, Lewis and Clark decided to split up and search separately. They split up at Decision Point. Well, Lewis followed the Marias River to the north. Clark followed the Missouri River to the south. Both men, again, would be searching for this great waterfall because, according to the Indians, these waterfalls were located on the Missouri River, which would take them to the Columbia, which would take them to the Pacific. Well, finally, after a period of time, remember they stayed there for 10 days, Clark located these falls. He and Lewis reunited at Decision Point, and they made the decision to go southward on the Missouri. Very important decision. Very crucial that they made the right decision. And there's about 3 reasons why. First of all, it's pretty obvious. If they choose the incorrect route, would they ever have located the Columbia River? Which means they would have never gotten to the Pacific. Another reason was choosing the incorrect route would have taken the expedition way off course, maybe never to recover. Okay? They'd had to backtrack. It would have been a difficult situation. And the third reason why the decision, making the proper decision was crucial, is if they would have went north up the Marias, they would have been forced to camp there during the upcoming winter, which would not have been good on the Canadian border. Okay? So there really were 3 reasons why this decision they made had to be the correct one. One was an incorrect route would have forced the expedition north towards Canada. They would have been forced to winter in the high mountains. 2, choosing the incorrect route would have taken the expedition off course, maybe never to recover. And 3, if they chose the incorrect route, they would have never located the Columbia River, which they need to get to the Pacific Ocean. Okay? So they leave Decision Point at the mouth of the Marias, and they continue down the Missouri. And on June 13th of 1805, June 13th of 1805, Lewis records in his journals the sighting of the Great Falls of the Missouri River. On June 13th, 1805, Lewis records in his journals the sighting of the Great Falls of the Missouri River. That is located near present-day Great Falls, Montana. Have anybody been to Great Falls, Montana? Yeah, you have, so you know. So the falls are outside of town. Now, it's going to take the expedition a full month to get around the Great Falls. Obviously, they can't go over them, so they got to go around them. Now, I'm going to give you 5 reasons why this was quite a hardship on the expedition to portage the falls, to go around the falls. First of all, I'll give you this one, see if you can figure out the rest. The Great Falls of the Missouri River was not just one fall. It was 5 cascading falls. So it's not like if you got over the first fall, you were okay. You had 4 more. So the Great Falls were 5 waterfall cascades, one after another. What else might be a hardship to go around that particular area? What would be a hardship?
Bears.
That's exactly right. The grizzly bears were very abundant. And these grizzly bears, every night they camped, came in looking for a snack. So the area was swarming with grizzly bears who continually approached whenever the expedition camped. So we got the Great Falls consisting of 5 waterfall cascades, and we also have the fact, and I'm telling you, Peyton's going for the MVP of the day, grizzly bears. What's another thing that might have been a problem for them to get around those falls? Well, you're close. They've got to get around them. What? Well, you're close, yeah. They had to haul their canoes, their supplies, and their equipment around 17 miles. That's how far they had to go to get around those falls. So, you know, remember all that equipment we told you they brought with them? Obviously, they used some, but they got quite a bit with them. Well, they got to pack the canoes they have, all their supplies and equipment around that 17-mile route. Now, we'll kind of get back to, I forget who said it, what about the journey around the falls? What was that going to be like? They have paved highway went around them?
Muddy.
Well, rough terrain.
Yeah.
Very rough terrain. Now you can drive your car around from the top of the falls to the bottom, but you couldn't then. It was a very rough terrain. And it was very difficult to get around. So it was difficult enough to hike around, let alone carry canoes and supplies and equipment. Okay? One more thing, kind of had to do with grizzly bears, in a way. An annoyance.
Mosquitoes.
That's exactly right. Mosquitoes and gnats were just horrid. Just horrid. and especially around the falls, because what are the falls? Breeding grounds, they're water. So the mosquitoes and gnats were just very, very thick during the expedition, but they were especially thick around the Great Falls of the Missouri. So they fought 5 waterfall cascades. They were forced to haul canoes, supplies, equipment around a 17-mile route. The journey around the falls was very rough terrain. Mosquitoes and gnats were very thick during the expedition, but especially thick around the falls. And the area was swarming with grizzly bears who continually approached whenever the expedition camped for the evening. Now, they get around, not the easiest thing to get around, and their next goal is they need to locate the Shoshone Indians. They need to locate the Shoshone Indians. Because what do they need more than anything from the Shoshone Indians to get from the Great Falls to the Pacific? What do they got to refresh? What?
Gunpowder?
Nope. What would they? Horses. Okay, they had to get new horses. They had accumulated horses along the way, and they're going to need to get much needed fresh horses, because what are they coming up upon that they really haven't hit yet? The Rocky Mountains. Okay, they got to get over them. Now, the Shoshone Indians, just didn't have a sign up that says, "Hey, welcome to our camp." They were a very elusive tribe. They didn't really want people to know where they were. So Lewis and Clark decide again to kind of split up to try to search for this Indian tribe. Now, Clark basically stayed with the expedition and continued his course along the river with the plan of meeting Lewis once Lewis located him, and maybe he would be the first to run in along the route. But the idea is that Lewis took the scouting party and went out and tried to locate the Shoshone Indians, and once he did that, he would meet back with Clark, who simply stayed the course with the expedition and continued along the river. Well, Lewis takes this scouting party out to specifically try and locate the Shoshone Indian tribe, and finally on August 17th of 1805, Lewis and his men make contact with the Shoshone Indians at a location called the Three Forks of the Missouri River. So on August 17th, 1805, Lewis and his men make contact with the Shoshone Indians, who are located at the Three Forks of the Missouri River. Now that's kind of an interesting place. Has anybody been to the Three Forks of the Missouri and actually stood? I know Laramie had, stood where these 3 rivers run in. What were the name of the rivers? Give me one, Rachel. What was one of the rivers that make up the Three Forks? Look on your map, you'll know. The Gallatin River. And that was named after Secretary of the Treasury, Albert Gallatin. That river was named by Lewis and Clark, the Gallatin River, after the Secretary of the Treasury, Albert Gallatin. I always get a kick out of this, and you'll get a chance. We'll go to the White House when you go to D.C. with you kids, and the Treasury Department is right next to the White House. And guess who the big statue is in front of the Department of the Treasury? Alexander Hamilton. Or Alexander Gallatin, excuse me. Okay? Albert Gallatin. Albert Gallatin. Okay, what's another river, Aaron? The Madison River. That was named after Secretary of State James Madison. He will later become what? President, but he served as Thomas Jefferson's Secretary of State. So you've got the Gallatin River named after Treasury Secretary Albert Gallatin. You have the Madison River named for Secretary of State James Madison. And obviously the last river is the Jefferson River, who was named after President Thomas Jefferson. Very kind of a cool place. Good fishing there. Nice place in Montana. My wife we always talk about maybe when we retire someday to get closer to the granddaughters, we'd move to Three Forks. Yeah.
They didn't take Zachary and Baby with them, did they?
It sure did. Sure did. Now, this is interesting that she mentions Sacagawea, because at this point, at the Three Forks of the Missouri River, she began to recognize the country. Kind of a deja vu, like, ooh, it seems like I've been here before. I'm starting to recognize this country. And the reason why she recognized the country is because she had been there many years before when she was a young girl, when she was taken prisoner by another Indian tribe. So she actually had been in that area before and began to look at things and say, hey, I remember this. I was here once before. Now that wasn't the most important discovery when they met with the Shoshone Indians. The fact that she recognized the country, that would help them because she might know her way around a little better. But what happened is when the expedition started to communicate with the Shoshone Indians, they found out that the Shoshone chief and Sacagawea were brother and sister. And so she had been raised Shoshone, had been taken from her tribe by an enemy tribe, and they found out they were brother and sister. Well, this sure helped relations, didn't it? Between the Corps of Discovery and the Shoshone Indians. And because of that great relationship, after finding out that the Shoshone chief and Sacagawea were brother and sister, the Corps of Discovery decided to spend 2 weeks with the Shoshone Indians to try to get a well-deserved rest before their final push to the Columbia River and then to the Pacific. So they decided to stay there for 2 weeks. Now, during that 2 weeks, the Shoshone really helped the Corps of Discovery because what did they do that they needed them to do? The whole reason they were looking for them. They supplied them, and they traded horses and got some fresh horses so that they could travel the remainder of the trip, especially over that rough terrain, over the Rockies they know is coming about. And the second thing the Shoshone did during that 2 weeks of rest is they directed the expedition on the exact route they would need to take to get to the Columbia River. So now there's not going to be any doubt. They know where to go to get to the Columbia because the Shoshone were very familiar with that area and knew the route. So not only did they get fresh horses, they also got accurate directions to get to the Columbia River. The only problem with those directions were the route was going to take them right through the Rocky Mountains over one of the most rugged trails available through what is now known as the Lolo Pass. And the Lolo Pass is located near Missoula, Montana, and it is a brutal pass. You don't even want to drive that thing with a car. I mean, it is windy, it's narrow 2-lane, it's a lot of animals on the trail. You don't want to drive it during the night because it's very dangerous. A good friend of mine was a principal over in Idaho on the other side over there, and he drove back and forth to Missoula, which is about 100 miles, to see his daughter play basketball for the University of Montana. He said it was the worst road ever. This isn't even a road, this is a rough trail. So on September 13th of 1805, the expedition arrived at the start of Lolo Trail and would now make their trek over Lolo Pass to get through the Rocky Mountains en route to the Columbia River. So on September 13th of 1805, the expedition arrived at the Lolo Trail, and they would begin a 140-mile trail into present-day Idaho, and this would be the most difficult hardship that they faced either going to the Pacific or coming back. Okay, so this Lolo Trail and going over the Lolo Pass is going to be the hardest thing they have done to this point, and what the hardest thing they will have done on the entire trip. Now, I'm going to give you some reasons why it was such a hardship. Okay, you can imagine what? I mean, the pass was very steep and rocky. You guys ever you go hiking, and you think, oh my God, if I can get to the top of this, oh, it's all downhill on the way back. Well, I find at my age that the downhill part is actually worse than the uphill part because of your knees and stuff in the rocky terrain. Now, if you're walking a nice paved trail, it might not be so much, but when you're walking on rough terrain, up or down doesn't make any difference. It's very difficult. So the first reason why this was the most difficult hardship on the expedition is that the terrain over the pass was very steep and rocky. What time of the year is it, Peyton? Because you're going for the MVP of the day. What's the date of this? Well, what was the date that they got to the Lolo Trail? I know you wrote it down. Well, it's right there. September, what's coming? Winter. So if you get in those high mountains, winter's already there. So not only is the trail rugged and rocky, it's icy and snowy too. So it even makes the travel even worse. Okay, so the ground is covered with snow and ice. Now, how many of you guys are four-wheelers? Take your four-wheelers out. Yeah, man, I'll tell you what, you get on one of these trails up there in the Bighorns, and if a tree falls over your trail, oh, I'll tell you, the Forest Service comes and they cut that up with a chainsaw and get it out of your way, so you don't have any problems. You think there was a Forest Service there? The third reason it was so difficult is the pass was broken by fallen timber, and it was very thickly overgrown with pine and fir trees. This was a very difficult pass. It wasn't like the trails you see up in the Bighorns where you take your four-wheeler out, or you decide to go on one of their hiking trails where they blaze the trail and cut everything down and clear it out so you don't have any problem. This thing was covered with fallen timber, very thickly overgrown pine and fir trees. Now, what would be the last problem they had? What else isn't on that trail they need?
Water.
You guys are hunters, aren't you? Do you find your best game in the middle of the thickest forest on the roughest trail ever?
No.
If you don't want to walk over that trail, you can imagine that animals don't. So there was very little game to shoot on the Lolo Trail. They weren't on the trail. They didn't want to be in that position either. Now, as a result of these hardships, it was very difficult for the expedition to get over Lolo Pass. They would eventually get over, but the men became so hungry during the trail over the Lolo Pass that they ate their candles. They ate their candles. That's all they had. They ate their candles. They ran out of food. No game on the trail. So, kiddos, I'll tell you, during the crossing of this Lolo Trail, they actually stop and camp near a small creek to rest, and they named the creek. And the name of the creek today is Colt-Killed Creek. Colt-Killed Creek. Because they were so hungry, the men killed